want to decide on the boot methods. Are we going to be dual booting, etc., etc.? So let's run through these bullets. More than one OS can be installed on the same computer. Very true. You can install a bunch of them. As many hard drives you can fit, you can put one OS on each hard drive, or you can put like 5 OSs on one hard drive. And then you can also boot off of flash drives too. Windows 98 and 2000 support dual booting with other OSs. So they supported it, but they didn't play very nice. So a lot of people would get it to work, and then at some point something goes wrong, and now all of a sudden they can't boot anything. So they could get corrupted. That's why Partition Magic came out. It just worked. That's just one example. There were many. So dual boot installations require you to complete all setup steps for each operating system. Yes, you have to go through and fully install each one, and then you can pick between once you start them up. You should draw up a compatibility list and special requirements. So this is again for older computers like the 486 DX or the DX266. They had special things where some things weren't compatible with other things. Certain CPUs weren't compatible, certain RAM wasn't compatible. It used to be a problem. You had to look in the manual and make sure that the RAM worked, which is something we still do today. You want to buy RAM with a computer that has been tested in that computer, because the devil's in the details with these things. So even today, if I were to build my own system and I grab some RAM on a desktop or something, I'm going to make sure I look in that manual and say, which RAM have they approved? And then I'm going to get the biggest one I can, right? You want to put the most amount of RAM in it you can. Windows 2000 dual boot considerations. You can dual boot Windows 2000 with several other OSs. But 2000 is a server version, right? Why would we want to dual boot? So each OS must reside on a different partition. Well, that makes sense, right? And then applications must be installed on each OS. That makes the different partition makes sense, because you don't want to have those booting problems in the server. You know, the servers need to just work. So when setting up but really you don't want to dual boot a server, you just turn it on and leave it on forever. So it doesn't make sense why you'd want to dual boot with Windows 2000. That's why I kind of said that in the beginning. But application, maybe if you're testing with it, testing like before pre-deployment or something, you might want to do this, right? But you need it on each one has to be in its own partition. And you don't want to use Partition Magic with something like this, because that kind of defeats the purpose of the testing, right? It's not quite the same. And then when setting up either an MS-DOS or Windows 95 and Windows 2000 Professional dual boot system, Windows 2000 Professional must be installed last. So the one, one likes to be the controller, right? The controlling system for the partition. Whichever one you want to have the dual boot management. So say you have a program, an OS, that can do dual booting and one that cannot. One supports it and one does not. You install the one that does not first, and then you install the one that does last. And that's what this is about. Each OS must have its own machine name and domain in a domain environment. So, not if you're dual booting, because only one's on at a time, right? There's no way for them to be on at the same time. So this is a iffy rule. We have VMs that defeat this rule all the time, based on the system environment, based on what I want to run, based on a test that I'm running. So each OS must have its own machine name in a domain environment if it's on at the same time as the other ones. Yes, you don't want to have a conflict there. And those names also save yourself a lot of trouble, in your IT department a lot of trouble, and the security people a lot of trouble. Name these machines with a relative. They mean something. Give them don't call every machine, root 67. Don't do that, because then we got to go look them up by serial numbers and figure out. It can be a nightmare trying to track down a machine, especially if your company is deployed all over the world. Windows 98 dual boot considerations. Drive C must be a FAT16 partition and include enough free space for the Windows 98 installation. So this is what they were getting at with the Windows 2000 partitions, having them on two different partitions, because the file systems are different. You cannot mix and match file systems on the same partition. You're only going to get one file system partition format for each partition. Each partition has its own format. You cannot put two on one partition. That's why you create two partitions, and then you can have an HFS Plus or whatever. HFS Plus is for OS X. And then you might have NTFS for your Windows systems. And then the two OSs must reside in different partitions on different hard disks. Okay, that makes sense, because you cannot mix and match partitions. So they're going to ask you some questions about this on the test, and just listen to what I'm saying, okay? If I'm building a brick road and your car has spikes on it that will destroy my bricks, you can't put that on my road. You need to stay on a different road. And that's what we're talking about here. We need to separate the roads. That car cannot go on my road. So we need different partitions. You have one hard drive, and we're going to chop it in half, and we're going to give one to the 98 and one to the 2000, right? Or whatever else. Could be Linux. Linux needs an HFS partition, HFSX, HFS plus some variant, and then the 98 or whatever, like 98 needs FAT16, but most modern OSs will boot off of NTFS, the NT file system. So you can have NTFS on one and then FAT16 on the other, and you need to put the correct operating system on the correct partition, because they don't play nicely. If they don't recognize the partition, they're not going to work at all, right? It's very important. It's like an integral part. It's like trying to put me in a room with a bomb technician, and there's a counter, and I speak English and he speaks Chinese. We are not going to work together, right? Everybody's going to be doing their own different thing, and that's what happens here. So you literally just won't be able to install it if you get them wrong. But just make sure that you understand why. You know, they need to be on different partitions. Because he may ask you, does Windows 98 need to be on a different partition than 2000? Yes, it does. The file systems are different. 98 uses FAT16, so it needs a partition for that. And then 2000 uses NTFS. It needs a partition for that. So the two OSs must reside on different partitions or on different hard disks. Now, why is it okay to put them on different hard disks? Because they're going to have different partitions, right? Each hard disk will have its own partition. One will be FAT16 for 98 SE, and then NTFS for Windows 2000. That's why. So you can take one hard drive and split it in half logically, different partitions, or you can take two hard drives, different partitions. So hopefully that makes sense. Don't let that confuse you on the test. It's an easy one to miss, and there's no reason to miss it. It's a very simple question. But of course, anything's simple once you understand it, right? So if you have any questions, let us know on this.